This is Steve Zeltzer with WorkWeek, and WorkWeek has covered the ongoing struggle in the NewsGuild, which is part of the CWA, around sexual harassment and the issues that took place at the Pittsburgh local, where the president was sexually molesting journalists and students under his supervision. And this has been followed up by an investigation by PayDay reporter Mike Elk about a struggle going on now in the NewsGuild in New York and in Chicago at the Tribune in the issue of democracy transparency. So welcome to WorkWeek, Mike.
Great to be on the show, Steve.
So Mike, why don't you go over some of the issues that you covered in the New York Times article, the issue of transparency, financial transparency, and the actual large number of workers that have joined the Guild and how that's reflecting itself internally within the Guild.
Well, it's interesting because, Jody Cantor was one of the authors of the Harvey Weinstein expose for Me Too. And a few weeks ago, a bunch of reporters at some of these new digital media union outlets started attacking these reporters as scabs because they had signed a letter asking for greater financial transparency from the Guild. This comes as the New York NewsGuild, the largest chapter of the NewsGuild, the guild that really sets the tone for the whole organization nationwide. This comes as the New York NewsGuild is asking for a dues increase, which would amount to $500 to $1,000 a year. Pretty significant. And if you're going to ask members to, sacrifice that kind of money, then they're going to want to know where it's going. But the Guild has told its members that, they don't keep a budget on paper. A long-term budget. This was an exact quote they told 200 union members. We don't keep we do quarter to quarter, and they were asked, well, why do you do quarter to quarter? And they said, well, the reason we do that is because of the layoffs in our industry. And they claimed that they had seen so many layoffs last year that it affected the union finances. The actual truth is, when you look at the Department of Labor records, what we found is that the union actually increased their revenue during the pandemic by $500,000, which is significant. For the last several years, the union's been operating in a deficit of $1.5 million a year, which, sometimes unions should be in deficits, but there should be an open, transparent plan so that members feel like they have some say for how financial decisions are made in their unions. And right now, they're going to their members and they're claiming to their membership, we need a dues increase to pay for new organizing. But an analysis that we did of their financial records raised deeper issues. The union made $500,000 more, $470,000 more last year in revenue than they did in the year before. And this was in the midst of the pandemic when there were a lot of layoffs at places. And this is because they were organizing first contracts, but also many unions saved money during the pandemic because there wasn't, big trips, there weren't expense accounts, there weren't conferences, they weren't keeping utilities on at union halls. So unions saved money in a lot of ways during the pandemic. Not all of them, but they made $500,000 more. Now, when you look at where that $470,000 went, in 1 year, they doubled their legal expenses from about $300,000 a year to $600,000 a year, which for a local of only 4,000 people, University of Wyoming, labor law professor Mike Duff told us is a lot of money. It's too much money. And there's so much money that one of the partners, this guy, Benjamin Dictor, he's a young 30-something, a few years out of law school, and he's buddies with Nasran Mohit, who's the organizing director. He got made partner in his law firm. They were bringing in so much money. They were the top recipient of money. And so, we have these huge legal bills, and they're using these people to negotiate, the lawyers to negotiate the bargaining table. You don't need lawyers at the bargaining table. You can have rank and file members do that. You can have a union rep assist them. You don't need a lawyer at the table. You need a lawyer to look over maybe the fine print occasionally and bounce ideas off of, but you need to empower the members to understand legal contracts and understand bargaining and not have a lawyer come in and do it. And this really gets to the kind of top-down, technocratic, professional, bureaucratic approach of the NewsGuild. It's very much a union that sees its members as dues payers and not as members, and doesn't activate them in that way.
And this is the lack of transparency apparently has created a crisis in the NewsGuild in New York. Members are shocked and surprised that a lot of this information has not been available to them. I mean, journalists who are in the Guild are investigative reporters, yet they have not been provided the information by their own local, you're saying, to examine the books and find out what's really going on.
Yes, not only that, but they're also being called bougie scabs. And meanwhile, we find out the average compensation of an employee at the New York Guild is $170,000 a year. I mean, who's making the money here, right? I mean, most of the staff is making dramatically more than even reporters at the New York Times are making. So, that's very problematic. And it speaks to deeper issues of what's going on and who is the union serving. And it should traditionally be brought up that the vast majority, I looked at the bios of the staff, 2/3 of the staff never worked in any sort of newsroom or journalistic organization. It's very much this professional union bureaucrat servicing model of we'll come around, and when we need you to show up to a rally, you show up to a rally. But they're not really giving members ownership. And when you start bringing in a lawyer to handle contract bargaining, not just is it a waste of money, but it's a waste of an opportunity to empower your membership.
And isn't this part of business unionism, where you have appointed officials appointed by the union leadership, the union tops, making decisions for the membership instead of having the rank and file electing their own representatives to represent them at the bargaining table and other positions?
Exactly. I mean, it's exactly that. And what's even troubling now is that the New York NewsGuild, the New York Times local, it's a 4,000 person local, the New York NewsGuild. The New York Times local is about 1,400 members of that. And right now, there's a big debate within the union about should people, because about 1,000 or so, from what we can tell, members of the New York NewsGuild don't have a union contract yet. So the question is, should those members be maybe asked to pick up some sort of voluntary dues, some sort of half dues? Some unions do this, they do half dues, not all, but in some organizing situations, particularly in other countries, when you join a union, you join a real organization. You're not, but what we say in the NewsGuild is they say they're not going to ask for dues and get a first contract. Some of these places, you're talking a 2-3 year fight. And paying dues is important also so people feel like a sense of ownership over what they're doing. I've been out at worker centers, Latino worker centers, where, they'll ask folks to pay $5 a month, just something to pitch in and feel some sort of sense of ownership. And I think right now what you have is you have a group of young people in some of these digital media union shops that are pretty left-leaning, who've been through some union drives, who've been through layoffs, who've been through some serious trauma. And the union comes along and they look like saviors. Whereas some of the older members who've been around for a while and seen some of the issues, have questions. And in this situation, you see the staff pitting members against one another in the middle of a contract talks at the New York Times. What a bad look to have hundreds of your fellow union members tweeting at you, calling you scabs while you're at the bargaining table. I mean, management at the New York Times must be licking their chops.
And this issue of democracy and workers running their own union, did that come up as well with the Alphabet Workers Union, who said that they had not approved the rank and file an international agreement that came out of the international of the NewsGuild?
There was certainly a situation there where there was some sort of agreement that was cut where they promised people legal representation that were fired, and then they took it out from under them. So that's a pattern. But we've also seen that in other places in the NewsGuild. At the Chicago Tribune, they wanted to do a certain style of bargaining on a national level. They wanted the national to run it, and the local had some issues. They weren't totally opposed to the approach, but they had some issues with the way the voting was set up. And so, much like how the U.S. Senate, gives overrepresentation to smaller states, in the union, smaller shops often get overrepresented. For instance, in the New York NewsGuild constitutes, over 25% of the membership, but they're only 10% of the executive board, but they're the cash cows for the rest of the union. And now what's starting to happen, because, you have 1,400 members, that's a pretty decent sized union. That's a local, and some other unions in its own sense. Some of the reporters at the New York Times are talking about forming their own locals, which is tough. But, to kind of counter this, the New York NewsGuild is now trying to eliminate the unit council at the NewsGuild and switch to, some sort of shop steward system that doesn't, that reports directly to the local staff, right? And so it's really problematic. And you saw this at the Chicago Tribune, where a local made a decision, had issues with the process, and the response of the International Union under John Schloss's leadership was, we're going to pull your bargaining rep for sessions tomorrow as a threat to them. And they did it. So, I mean, here you have top-down union leaders controlling their own members. And I think this goes beyond just John Schloss, who's the president of the NewsGuild. This goes up to Sarah Steffens, who's the secretary-treasurer, comes out of this union. And this goes up to Chris Shelton. This is the way they do unionism. They're union leaders who see it as about themselves and about their ideas, and not about encouraging the ideas of the members.
And for a union that calls itself the Communication Workers of America, you think that they would be able to have interactive communication, they'd be able to have a lot more membership participation that they have and control. Yet that doesn't seem to be the case. There's no labor channel for the CWA. Struggles go on at CWA, people don't know about them. They could have a live program on different struggles of the union.
Certainly, but they just don't have that. And I think that's intentional, is that they want to control the message. They want to control the union. They want to keep it this nice little manageable thing, not have any headaches. I mean, because democracy is headaches. Democracy is staying late at night places. You know what I mean?
And you had a breakthrough story about what was going on in Pittsburgh and the ramifications of that politically. You uncovered that the president there, Michael Fuoco, had been sexually harassing and molesting a journalist. You broke that story, and you yourself came under attack and by Schloss and other people. Why don't you talk about that and the relevance of that if the union is going to confront these issues of sexual harassment, discrimination in the workplace?
I was a member of the union for many years, and as a union member, I thought it was my responsibility to report this. And that there was a man here who was the union president here at Pittsburgh. There was talk of a strike at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, who was known as the Harvey Weinstein of Pittsburgh. He would tell women, you don't get a job here unless you sleep with me. He would rape women. He beat women. He did all kind of terrible stuff. And he had a child
with union dues, apparently.
With union dues, yes. He had a child with a freelancer there. And that was 40 years younger than him, and 30 years younger than him. Sorry, I got that. But he had it, he did this, and the management of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette knew all this about him, and they used it as leverage to get crappy deals for their members. So it's very much a union that in some ways, in my opinion, reflects the toxicity of corporate media, in that the people running it come out of these very top-down newsrooms, and they operate that way.
And you broke this story, and as a result of this political struggle in the union, there was supposed to be a report, an independent investigation about what happened, so that the members would be informed and this would not take place in the future and other similar instances. What happened?
Well, they promised to do an independent third-party investigation, and they never did it because there's so much there. There were so many warnings that were given. There was so much credible information, and we know that their plan of attack, from what the New York Times reported, was that they were going to attack me as an autistic over mental health issues. That was the way they planned to play it. Is that, well, Mike Elk's crazy. Nobody believes this, and he has a vendetta against the NewsGuild, right? These people have no appreciation for democracy. They know nothing about union democracy. They haven't been involved in unions very long. And I really fear that the NewsGuild is taking a turn for the worst.
And this is going to come up probably at the convention in October. Should members have questions to ask in the CWA and the NewsGuild about what happened and whether or not people have been held accountable for what happened?
Well, we intend to take legal action. We'll have more update on that very soon. But I think members should. I think this is something that we should raise at the CWA convention. There's been talk about revising the bylaws to make it easier to deal with harassment, but it just hasn't gotten there yet. You know,
And this scandal and this cover-up, it seems, that has gone on in Pittsburgh continues. You think employers and these media companies are going to take advantage of that now to go after the Guild and to say this organization is not able to handle its own internal business?
certainly, and you know, they're competing with the Writers Guild often, right? So if I was a Writers Guild rep, I would certainly be bringing that up. So I think they're in a lot of trouble, and I really worry that there's the William C. Foster book, The Misleaders of Organized Labor, and you know, these are the misleaders of organized labor. You know, these are people that are looking out for their own interests and not looking out for transparency and democracy in their unions.
And the issue of democracy in the AFL-CIO, democracy in our unions, the Vermont AFL-CIO is under attack by Richard Trumka, president of the AFL-CIO, for calling for a general strike if Trump tried to prevent transfer of power. Do you think that this political social crisis, the growth of fascism, the kind of crisis that we're in, requires a new structure in the labor movement to confront this new situation?
Exactly. We need to get, you know, so many people see unions as institutions, as bureaucracies, in some cases like insurance companies, really bad unions, right? And nobody likes your insurance company. People want to feel like they're parts of real organizations, not that they're handing money over to somebody once a month that never does much for them. I mean, I was out at Amazon in Alabama, and I was talking to a worker who had been a member of RWDSU, the union that was organizing elsewhere. And he said, yeah, you know, they just didn't do much for me there. So, you know, I'm not going to vote for them.
And
So
the model of unionism, I mean, you come out of the UE, your father's an organizer, and the UE as well as the ILWU came under attack during the 50s, during the witch hunt. The capitalists, the bosses really did not want that kind of union structure and that union movement. You think there's going to be a revival in the United States of unions like the UE and the ILWU who have a democratic structure and are completely organized kind of against business unions model?
well, I think it will. I think something that's interesting right now is there's an independent union that's attempting to organize Amazon on Long Island and JFK, whatever they call that facility there. And it's an independent union. And I think people are going to start looking for different answers because these kind of top-down unions just aren't going to do it anymore.
And last, PayDay, your journal, online journal, has been really the only journal that's covered this quite closely. Is this part of the problem in the labor movement? There's not real coverage of what's going on within the labor movement itself?
You know, labor reporters have always been, you know, a lot of reporters are access reporters in the sense that, you know, they don't piss off the people they're supposed to be covering. But I think in the online era, it's gotten even worse because now journalists are so dependent on traffic. And if you can get a union to make your story go viral through their vast social networks and getting their members to send it out, then you can do pretty good. And there's lots of reporters that have those deals with unions and they don't cross them for that reason.
And that's why your story is one of the unique stories about what's really going on in the newspaper guild and with journalists. So thanks for joining us on WorkWeek, Mike.
Thanks so much.